What's going on, Creator Factor fam? I am your host who loves you the most, Ozeal. Yes, loving it. And today, I'm really excited to kind of dig into this podcast episode. But you know what? Before we get into it, because some of you may or may not know that this is a podcast for business-minded creators who value community, collaboration, and building a brand of impact. And our guest today has been in the broadcasting game for over 30 years. So he's an OG who's done everything from editing tapes to launching over 3,000 podcast episodes. That's right, 3,000. And in 2006, he launched Fifth and Main, which eventually transformed into TrueStory.fm, where he helps creators like us tap into the power of podcasting to build brands and connect with audiences. But here's the reason why I wanted to invite him on the Creator Factor show, my friends. He's also a creator with ADHD, and so he's faced all the highs and lows and everything in between. And today we're going to dive deep into how he navigates the creative process as a creator with ADHD, what he's learned about balancing the chaos of distraction and focus, and why, ADHD might be the superpower for us content creators. He's the co-author of a new book called Unapologetically ADHD, a step-by-step framework for everyday planning on your terms, and is also the co-host of Taking Control, the ADHD podcast, which I'm a big fan of. Creator Factor fam, let's welcome to the show none other than my man Pete Wright in the building. Pete, how are you feeling today, my friend? We got through it. We made it.
We did it. Ozeal, I'm so stoked to be here. I'm just really glad I've been listening to your show. I'm a big fan. Your voice, man, if you could just come by the house and read me stories to bed, I dig what you do on the podcast. I love listening to you. So it is an honor to be here.
I receive that, my friend. I really do. I really appreciate everything that you have done with the podcast and really kind of digging into your backstory. And, I was like, I really need to get Pete. So I shot my shot and you said yes. So we're here about to make it happen. And, Pete, this is something that I've been going down the rabbit hole as a lot of ADHDers do, right? We get obsessed with topics and we want to discover and go deeper into this. And this is something that really surfaced for me. And it was a conversation I was having with a lot of fellow creatives when I was hearing their stories of being distracted, of following different things, having a trouble focusing and staying on task. And so when I discovered your podcast, it really came out of just perfect timing when I was really struggling with it. And I was trying to discover some answers. So we're going to talk about creators and ADHD and everything else that you're doing with the podcast and the new book, which, by the way, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Let's start here. Let's rewind the clock and let's go back to young Pete. Share with us that moment, Pete, where you discovered your brain worked differently from everybody else.
Oh yeah, no, young Pete didn't know. Young Pete didn't find out until he was about 29. But I can tell you what I learned about ADHD from being a kid who witnessed others who had ADHD, right? And this is, I think, a lot of the baggage that we of a certain generation bring with us into adulthood, which is, there's a kiddo in my class who had ADHD, very clear, and was diagnosed, and everything I learned about it was, oh my God, this kid, you don't want to be like this kid. Right? They take him to separate rooms. They make him carry around a little typewriter that he typed on. He's got, now we call them accommodations, but as his peers in class, they were punishments. Like, we had no other way to see them. Parents were like, oh, thank God my kid doesn't have ADHD, right? It was a thing that nobody understood, and it just resonated with different, right? Like, it was just different. And come to find out years later, like, he had only one, the spectrum is very, very wide. It's very, very wide. And his ADHD led him to be an extraordinary creative. He makes the most beautiful instruments, like classical mandolins, by hand now, and it's extraordinary. And he found his thing. But the lesson I got from watching him was, oh my God, this is scary. ADHD is scary. So I did the roller coaster that we all do, man. Like I went through high school, with lots of supports, and I went to college with none. And that, that's a killer, right? I mean, I know, you can relate.
I can relate. Yeah.
It was, I was 29. I'd been married for about a year, and my wife and I went into marriage counseling and said, we just want to check up. Are we doing okay? After about 6 sessions, the psychologist looks over at us and says, you guys are great. You guys are going to be fine. Pete, I'd love to talk to you about your ADHD. And that's the first time anyone had ever given me those words. And that started me down the path of diagnosis, of treatment, of, another roller coaster of watching and feeling the world open up when you're given words to describe how your brain works, right?
Was it more liberating to you more than anything?
It's liberating for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it's terrifying for a couple of years. And you naturally ostrich, you put your head in the sand and pretend I don't have. I mean, now I know, sure, somebody said I have ADHD. I'm sure it's not me. I'm sure it's not me. Right. So that was it. And that started me down the road of kind of exploring eventually who I am and how I relate to the world. And I'll tell you what it did most of all was it allowed me to re-synthesize interactions I have with others, with the people I'm working for, with the people I'm working with, and what I would, normally take as, judgment or insult or whatever. I was able to say, oh, wait a minute, this may be related to my ADHD.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting you say that, because I had a similar experience when I got diagnosed late as well, not too long ago.
Okay.
And it was liberating. I remember getting the diagnosis. Liberating is also very emotional for me. And it was emotional in a way, Pete, as you describe it, where it's like, okay, this all makes sense. Now you start connecting the dots, and you start looking at it from a different set of lens, and you're not taking everything so personal, and you're a little bit more gentler when it comes to self-criticism, and it still surfaces, but you're able to manage and be aware of it. And I think that level of self-awareness, and then really understanding, connecting the dots backwards, looking forward, I was like, oh, this totally makes sense. And I was really angry for myself for not discovering this, and even went through a moment where I was like, how come my mom didn't discover this, and what happened? But everything started making sense, and it was very, very, it was liberating. It was terrifying, but it was also very liberating. And I'm pretty sure a lot of creators who find out for the first time, that's usually how they feel.
Do you have a chance to talk to your mom about it? Like, have you had that conversation?
Slightly. We haven't dug really deep into it, but and seeing the way she is makes sense, because she was never officially diagnosed, but now knowing what I know now, and listening to your podcast and understanding the things that we go through emotionally, and the self-regulation, and just the forgetfulness, I see her operate on a day-to-day basis, and I'm like, okay, this totally makes sense.
I make sense when I look at her. Yeah, I mean, I had a chance. I talked to my mom for years. My mom was like, you don't have ADHD. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, totally dismissed it. Mm-hmm. It was, I mean, eventually she came around, and then when my dad died a few years ago, and she calls me and she says, my God, he had it too. Like, we just didn't know. We didn't know. He was in a job that was hand to glove for somebody with ADHD, and so it never really presented until he retired, and we were allowed to see kind of who he was. And we just sort of, all of us came to terms with the heredity of ADHD, right? And that was huge. That was explosive new information,
right?
For our family sort of legacy.
And now the information's out there, and I love, again, like the work that you're doing with Nikki, as far as just and other creators and other leaders talking about ADHD openly and embracing it, right? Just like the title of your book, Unapologetically ADHD. It's like, this is who we are. We embrace it. And there's some superpowers that come with it. There's a lot of things that we also can contribute to the world that are game-changing things in life, and what we bring to work and our relationships and everything that we do creatively. Speaking of creative, how was careers? Because that's something that we struggle with. What was kind of some of the careers that you saw, and were you like, if you look back and you make sense, it's like, oh, this is the reason why I couldn't hold down this type of job versus this one? Because I went down the rabbit hole, Pete, and I know a lot of creators who are listening or watching is, what career is the right one for me? Because we struggle trying to get fit into that structure role. Like, talk to us a little bit about your career path and kind of how you navigated ADHD through that.
Yeah, man. I mean, this goes back to Dad. Like, I followed Dad's footstep. He was a local newsman. He was a journalist, and I tried to go into a different field. I tried to go into actually psychology. That was my undergrad, and a theater, double major, theater and psychology. Right? What are you going to do? And that lasted about 2 years. And I called, and I just, in hand, I said, I got to transfer. I got to go to a J school. This is what I want to do. My first job in high school was racking tapes for the television station. And so, when you're in that kind of an environment, like, ADHD is not really a question, because things change every 8 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's perfect for me. That was perfect for Dad. It's perfect for me. I went into that field. I was on camera, but I learned to edit. I learned to run camera. I learned to I was a reporter and an anchor. And that job moved so fast that I didn't have time to drop the ball on anything. Right? The moment you finish one thing, you do something else, and you only have a certain amount of time to get distracted, right? So I never got distracted. There was never any time for distraction. So it was luxurious, and that took me to some interesting places. At one point, however, I was faced with a fork, and that fork was to change sides and go to the public relations route, go into corporate media. Got a job with a big company, and I spent years doing corporate PR, and that, turns out, was a disaster, because there was a lot more slow time. There's a lot more time sitting at a desk and thinking, I need to pick up this phone right now, but I cannot see how to connect my hand to the phone right now, because there's too much between my hand and the phone right now, right? I just can't see how that works. There's a lot of alone, self-guided time. Like, I didn't have a lot of signal yelling at me to push the next button, right? And so that lasted until 2006, and podcasting was taking off. I launched a podcast for the company I was working for, and I don't know if this is interesting to people at all, but I have a story that I only just started thinking about because it's been 20 years, and I got a letter. We'd done about 6 weeks of the podcast for my company. It was great. It was neat. And
what year was this, Pete?
This was probably around 2005, right? Wow, so okay. Yeah, right. I mean, like, the word was coined in 2004. That's the kind of nerd I am, right? Okay. Like, I loved this stuff.
Even an OG in podcasting. Okay, there we go, guys. Right.
Wow. So we got this letter that from our legal department that said, essentially, it was an internal cease and desist. And we said, why are you telling us not to do this? And they said, because we have received notice from a patent troll that said we own the patent for putting audio in a feed, right? They said they owned the patent for what ends up being RSS. They, of course, did not own the patent for RSS, but they were more troll than patent, and but we, as a result, had to stop our internal podcast for our own teams. Like, there are thousands of people inside our company that, as a PR organization, we were getting this message out to. It was working great. People loved it, and we had to stop. And that was the moment I knew I have to quit this job, because the stuff I really want to do is right here. I want to tell these stories on a microphone, and so I left.
So you were doing even internal podcasting, which I think that term has been used these past couple of years. That resurfaced.
Oh, yeah.
Internal podcast, but you guys were doing that back then. That was pretty innovative back then.
Yeah, right.
Ahead of your time.
It was pretty great. But when you think about it, like, that was the channel we could control, right? And that I think is a really important lesson. Like, what channels do you have control over? And we had the ability to put this podcast episode at a play bar on every single employee's desktops around the country, right? And US and Canada, there's 25,000 people that could listen to the podcast at the same time Wednesday morning. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, and I think that's the beauty, and which is one of the reasons why I love this medium that we call podcasting, is because of that. One of the many reasons. Let's talk about practice and habits, because for a lot of creators, Pete, ideas. Idea overload is real. It could be, it's exciting. It is super, super challenging. Curious to know, what practice and habits, have you? And I know in the book there's a lot of great, step-by-step practical advice there, which again, we're going to link up in the show notes. But what are your personal practice and habits that have helped you turn your, ADHD into your superpower, and has helped you in your creator journey?
Well, I only want to push back a little bit on calling my ADHD a superpower, because I'm one of those people who has been bit by my own ADHD enough times that my superpower ends up being like Cyclops, right? Without the glasses. You know what I mean? Like, if I need to cut a hole through a lead wall, I am on the mark. But any other context, and I'm just an unmetered energy source, right? And I feel like it takes such control to get me in. So I often don't think about it necessarily as a superpower.
Okay.
What I do know is I find I'm able to make connections pretty quickly. I can see patterns that usually before, other people that I'm working with who don't live with ADHD.
That part.
Right? Yeah, right? Like, that's pretty cool. And I can see, I think, I had a buddy just today wrote me a message saying that you, Pete, really, celebrate pastiche, right? This idea of taking things that exist and building new things on top of them. And I've always heard pastiche as a really negative word, like it's a negative tone, like derivative, but he's kind of right. Like, I like taking things and exploring and amplifying them. Like, I see myself as like an enthusiasm amplifier, right? I love to take new tools and tech and just get people excited about it.
That's your new title, by the way, Pete. I think you need to own that.
If it comes with like a badge or a crown, that would be great. So, okay, so back to your question. I think it was habits and practices.
Correct. Yeah, just like some really practical advice and habits that you personally have helped you. I know everybody's different. That's another thing with ADHD. I know everybody's different, but what are you doing that works?
Well, especially because I have a particular flavor of ADHD. Means my hyper focus lives in technology. Like, when I get a new tool or a new device, like, I can land there and not come up for air for a while, longer than most normals, right? Okay.
Get it.
Which means I try everything. Like, there's usually not much of a time when I'm not like triple wielding to-do applications. You know what I mean? Like, but I'll tell you right now, I am trying to really simplify. I'm trying to simplify everything. So I make a practice of, I would say this is the big one for me. I have 3 alarms in the afternoon. One starts at noon to remind me, hey, at 4:30 you have something to do. One is at 3:30. It says, hey, at 4:30 you have something to do. And one is at 4:20. Hey, at 4:30 you have something to do. And at 4:30, all I have to do is look at my calendar for tomorrow. That's all I have to do at 4:30. I have to open up tomorrow's calendar and see what's next. When I do that, I'm able to sleep better at night. I'm able to make notes thoughtfully for about 5 minutes about what I might need to prepare for the next morning. I'm able to just be present with the next 24 hours. If I skip that, I am in what my wife calls a tizzy. Right? I come in because I don't know about you, but this is my big thing. I don't shift contexts well. Do you know that feeling?
Oh yeah.
Like, you get to the end of the day and you find, like, my best time is like 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, right?
Okay.
That's when I am energetically at my best, but my family needs me, right? Like, my family needs attention. And so I have to somehow figure out how to turn off one part of me and turn on the next one without getting into just an internal storm of rage that the world isn't allowing me to be who I want to be right now, right?
Yep.
That's it. That's what James Ochoa calls the emotional storm of ADHD, right? It's that piece. I just learned a new thing from Dr. Michael Felt yesterday on a show, and I want to share it with you because I feel like if you resonate with what I just said, you're going to resonate with this. Delayed sensory affect. Have you ever heard that?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So imagine do you have kids?
I do.
Okay. How old are they? Young?
7. Yeah, 7.
All right. So
7, 12.
you got your 7-year-old. You really have something to do. Maybe you say, okay, you know what? No judgment. I want you to watch Bluey for 20 minutes, right? Whatever you got. Just give me 20 minutes where I can breathe and write something. And you say, okay, you got 20 minutes, kiddo. Do you need to eat? No. Do you need to go to the bathroom? No. You need anything at all? No, I don't. They watch the show for 20 minutes and the show is over. And at the end of that 20 minutes, what happens? Suddenly, they need to eat and go to the bathroom like nothing ever before, like no one has ever gone to the bathroom before, right? That's delayed sensory affect. And that's what happens naturally in kids with ADHD. It kind of sticks around. It's the tantrum that happens when you run out of energy, right? And you misconstrue your emotional reactions because you've been holding it in all day, right? Okay, so I can be podcasting all day. I'm on the mic all day long. At the end of the day, it comes 5 o'clock and my wife says, what do you want for dinner? And I flip out because I have a boatload of things that have been coming at me all day that I've been holding off because I've been this guy, and now it's all coming back at me. So what my wife hears outside this door is, Pete's so happy. Pete's playing with Ozeal and he's doing great. Like he's smiling, he's laughing, it's great. But he comes out and he's a jerk. That's delayed sensory affect. That's me not being able to manage the context shift of day to night, Pete. How's that hit you?
Oh, wow. It hit me like a ton of bricks because I can totally relate to that, and it makes sense on so many levels. And that's really been a big challenge. Got me thinking about a lot of things, Pete, even specifically when it comes to parenting,
Yes.
just switching from work into dad mode. And okay. And that's been, now I also am just recognizing all the emotions of how I come off. I can go hot and cold and shifting that. It's
like that, right? Yeah. It's fast. And that's a partner, because ADHD has Penn Holderness is delight, and he was on our show not long ago, and the way he talks about it is like ADHD's best friends are anxiety and OCD, right? Okay, well, that was me, and I find like when I'm treating my OCD, my anxiety tends to be a little bit less, and my ADHD is more manageable, right? I can fix the perseverative thoughts, I sleep better, so all the things are best friends. When I think about the delayed sensory affect, that is a sort of implementation of all of those things that I live with, all of my best friends, anxiety, ADHD, and OCD, and that has the potential to put me in a storm if I'm not mindful about making that transition. And the number of times, like we talked about this on the show, and the number of times people have reached out to us and said, oh my God, I have to tell my husband when he comes home from work that I don't work for you. I'm your damned wife. This is why, because we have a hard time with this. As I don't know, am I helping at all?
It's helping. You're giving me, like, I want to go in different directions. You're just giving me a lot to think about now.
Yeah.
But it's making total sense. This is something I'm gonna have to go back and listen to. I'm like, wow, okay.
I do. I mean, I don't want to belabor the point. I want to be of service to your listeners. But I felt like when I heard it as a creative and a professional, like a business-minded professional, I realized this has been in my head all my life. Yeah. And it's exacerbated by ADHD. It's important to just be mindful of it.
You just mind, and that's what I'm thinking. I was thinking of just self-awareness is just so important. Again, that's why I truly believe in the message that you and Nikki are doing on the podcast and the book, because we need to understand more of this. There needs to be more. The information's out there. There's a lot of brilliant thinkers that are coming out and are putting, terminology to this and making sense of how the switching and all the emotions and why these different roles for us, whether it's being a dad and an entrepreneur, husband, a wife, how that affects our emotions and how that affects the way we kind of operate on a day-to-day life. Again, it's just self-awareness, and you said the word mindfulness, so I think it's super important information to have. All right. Your thoughts on digital, I mean, I know this is different, but digital planning, project management tools. I want to just say that I've struggled with that, Pete. I'm not sure if this is a common thing for ADHDers and people you come across. I've tried everything, the books, the digital planners, Asana, the Trellos, the Notions, you name it. And next thing you know, you look in my room and I have a bazillion notebooks with the same type of notes and everything's just scattered all over the place. I'm trying to find a system, which is the reason why I want to buy the book. Yeah, but anyways, your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't necessarily. I'm not one of those who prescribes to like digital versus analog. One is better than the other, right? Yeah. Everything we're talking about is you got to build a system that actually addresses your individual issues, and that's like it's been our mantra for 15 years, is like the problem is not a system problem. The problem is a you problem. So let's figure out the you system and figure out what it is you need so that you can find what you need when you need it, right? That's all. That's all it is. For me, I'm a Mac guy, and I have everything stripped down to 3 basic tools, right? My number one, 2, 3 tool. My time is managed in Fantastical. It is an exceptional, extraordinary tool, and it let me cancel my Calendly subscription because it does it all. My task management is Todoist. Right? Okay. I absolutely love Todoist. And I'm one of the Obsidian people. Like, I ended up going deep into Obsidian, which is because I love text-based notes. I don't need a lot of frivolity, right? I just need text-based notes that I can search and link to and link across. So my Obsidian, that's where I put my database of like me, my personal knowledge management. So between those 3 tools, I can get my whole day done. When I stray from those tools and I think, oh, I'll just put this note in Apple Notes, that's when things go crazy. So I have a hard line about not using any other apps. My phone screen is austere. It has photo memories, the memories that come up. I like that little dopamine boost of seeing pictures of my kids when they were young. It's got those 3 apps, and it has where I look. I have my RSS feeds, and I look for my news through my news. That's it. Okay. That's all it's got, right? Yeah. Because I have found that friction is a big deal for me, right? Yeah. If I have too much friction, I slow down. If I reduce friction, I get to speed up. Reducing friction allows me to do a thing before I have time to get distracted by another thing, right? I want to say that again. Reducing friction allows us to do a thing before we get distracted by another thing. How many times have you said, I just need to make a note of this one thing, and then you get lost figuring out, now which note app should I use?
Right here.
Okay, right. I only have one destination, right? It's just Obsidian. There's no friction there. I hit a button, I start typing. There are lots of tools that allow you to do this. Drafts is great. Our community uses Drafts. You mentioned Notion, Coda, like all of these tools are awesome. The point is to commit to the bit, right? that's huge.
Commit to the bit. I
love
that.
Yeah, so what I love about the sort of duo of Fantastical and Todoist, we call this our work box, right? This is where work gets done, and that is discrete from the inbox. Those are all the signals that come in, whether you're talking about social media or email or text messages. That's all inbox, and once we're done taking in all the signal, then we get to work, and this is the package of tools that we call the work box. And so those are mine. I like seeing the work that I have to do is in Todoist, and when I have to do it, I put it at a time slot in Fantastical. And that's how I do it.
That's it. Simple.
Yeah, I have to block time to get the work done. A lot of ADHDers really don't like that idea. And they struggle with either constraint, or they struggle with figuring out how to actually put tasks into time. But I'm telling you, that is the number one best way to figure out your life is to commit to some variant of simple blocking of time. And that's huge.
So picking your tech stack, your work box, as you say, and
Simple.
just sticking with it, right? Your top three.
Yeah.
And because I know one of the things that I know I wrestle when I speak with a lot of creators is that we're always, as you know, we get obsessed with different things, and we'll go, I was like, well, this looks good and this looks good. And they just added a really cool feature. And next thing you know it, we have a galore of software subscriptions. And you're like, what are we doing? We have not mastered. So I love the idea of just simplifying it to keep it efficient and don't, stress over it.
Oh, God. I mean, if there's anything, I feel like,
that's great advice.
Let the gray in my beard speak for something. Like, my life should serve as a warning to others, if nothing else.
Pete, let's talk about, task switching. That's one of the things. Whenever you do your time blocks, what are your thoughts on? Can you task? Is it possible for an ADHDer to task switch? Because I find myself saying, 1 hour I'm going to do this, and the hour I'm going to do this, and next thing you know it, for some reason, boom, I just go off and I'm scattered and it throws my whole day off. What are your thoughts on just saying, okay, for example, let's give an example for our creators out there. I'm going to create a podcast episode. I'm going to get ready for this interview with Pete. And this hour I'm going to do this, and then this hour I'm going to do outreach for more guests, and this hour I'm going to do this. Like, how do you go about planning for, let's say, your podcast guest or prepping for an interview? How do you and Nikki do it?
Well, okay, this is one of those do as I say, not as I do, maybe, right? I am one of those who, if I haven't said this on the record, I am not perfect. So I still succumb occasionally to needing the dopamine push. The dopamine push. In order to get something to really be able to switch into gear, need to strategically to delay activity until it's going to be too late if I don't buckle down and get it done, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So prepping for a podcast, for the ADHD podcast, we record Wednesdays at 9:00.
Okay.
And we record Wednesdays at 9:00 because that's when our live stream starts. And we have people in our audience with ADHD and in our member community, and they count on it being at 9:00 because they've structured their day around it. So I don't have any leeway besides being there at 9:00. That's kind of early to get my brain going. So I make sure that at 8:00, that's, my wife sort of helps me, kicks me out of bed to go walk the dog. And then I'm in it. Like, I realize I only have an hour. I have to figure out who we're talking to, what we're going to talk about. Like, I have to do that kind of fast. And that's my prep time. I do a lot of shows, and all of the prep happens really generally right before I go on the show. That's how my brain, I need to batch the activity, right? Like, if I were in your shoes, I would be thinking about Pete about a half hour before, and I'll think about Pete until the edit is done just after. But if I don't do it all at once, I'll stop somewhere, and I won't know how to get back. So,
you're preaching.
Is it possible to task switch? Sure it is. Mm-hmm. But I often tell people, like, if you're time blocking the way that really strictly, right? Then you might be doing it overzealously, and you might be doing yourself a disservice. We're not talking about hyperscheduling. Those are different things, right? Hyperscheduling, have you ever hyperscheduled?
No, I don't think I have.
So hyperscheduling is the act of scheduling every minute of your day.
Okay, I have. Yes, I have. I've tried that before.
Okay.
That was brutal.
Well, I'll tell you where that's useful. Can I tell you where that's useful?
Please.
Here's a hack. I'm in Fantastical or Google Calendar, wherever you are. Create a new calendar and call that your ideal calendar. Have you ever done this exercise?
Never have.
It's fantastic. Close all the other calendars so you can't see anything else. And then put appointments, I mean minute to minute, hour to hour, what you would love to be doing at any moment on any given day. Okay? So I'm talking about, like, all right, I know I get my best sleep before midnight. So I need to be in bed at 10, right? I'm going to sleep. I naturally get up early because my brain wakes up before I do. And so maybe I'm up at 5:30. What am I doing then? I'm going to eat breakfast. My kids say they get up at 6, they get ready for school. I have family time on the calendar for a couple of hours. Maybe I'm driving a carpool. I have an hour in there. Maybe I do a work sprint from 9 to 11, right? Maybe I want to introduce more writing in my life. So from 4 to 5, I'm going to write a novel. I'm working on a novel, right? You see what I'm doing? Like whatever it is, this is what you would love to be doing at any moment of your day. And you forecast it. Say maybe in 5 years, where do I want to be? And then you start turning on your other calendars. So you have your ideal calendar, and you then see where your current life overlays your ideal life.
Wow.
That exercise blows my mind every time, and I've been doing it for 15 years.
Okay.
It is go ahead.
I got to try it. I feel like, we got to try. I think this is amazing. I mean, I've heard of the perfect day exercise, but I've never heard it implemented actually in your calendar as an ideal like day in your calendar where you can see it and witness it and look at it every day, right? Is that just to see what your ideal day looks like? I love that.
I'll tell you, I turn it off mostly. And when I find I'm overwhelmed or overworked or overscheduled, I turn it on, and it becomes an act of agency that I have control over my time. And if I'm overscheduled to what I decided my ideal was, I can change that. I can reach into my time and reschedule that meeting for when I said I was going to do meetings. I can reschedule that podcast recording so I don't suck up my Friday afternoon every single week. I have control. It is a reminder of the agency that I have in the world.
I love that. That right there is a game changer. That right there, I'm thinking about it, and that got me excited. So thank you, Pete, for sharing that.
I hope so,
I've
man.
never heard that before. Never heard that before. Love that. Okay. All right. I have a few questions. I want to talk to you about podcasts. I want to talk to you about a little bit about the book and that process. Got so many questions. I'm telling you, I told you in the green room that I was like, there's a lot of things in my head. I have a lot of questions for you, Pete.
Whatever you want. I'm at your disposal.
Listen, one of the things, a lot of our creators are listening and watching. They're building a business. A lot of them are building an online business. Mm-hmm. They're building, YouTube channels. They're building their own communities and want to make their own impact. Early on when you were building, I know you made the switch from Fifth and Main, I believe was the company previously, and then you went to TrueStory.fm, which again, I'm going to put it in the show notes so you guys can check it. There's a lot of shows, great quality shows you guys should check out. Wow.
So many shows.
Impressive. I got to talk to you about how you manage that. Okay, we got to talk about that too. So,
right.
So talk to me. So you made the transition into podcasting. You went all in. You started this network. What did it look like, Pete? Like building the beginning stages of building TrueStory.fm, and did you have help? And how did you manage your time and emotions and everything else to be able to make that a success like it is today?
Okay. The secret is not much of a secret. The trick for me was, and I still have it up here, the first check I ever received from a client for helping them create a podcast was for $1,000, and it was for me to come in and help them create their podcast on project management. It was Ask Cadence, the project management podcast, and that company invested to the tune of 120 episodes with me, and I was the host, and I came in and I brought my gear and my dog and pony show, and I set up mics around the table, and other people came in and they taught. We used that as a teaching tool, the podcast, and they paid me to do that, right? And I took that money and I bought food for my family, and the rest I put into shows like the Next Reel Film podcast, which is that's the fun thing, right? That's the show that I do because I love movies, right? Nobody was paying me to sit down with my partner, Andy, and talk about movies for, nobody was interested in the way we talked about movies enough to do it. I didn't care. I didn't need to monetize it. I didn't need to do anything because it was monetized by my client work. So I think the most important thing to consider is if you only have one podcast, diversify your lines of income. right? There are people who need your skills, if you are a podcaster, who would love to hire you to do things as a creator on a freelance basis that will subsidize your creation such that you can then spend your time building your YouTube channel and building your other stuff. It's totally possible to do. I hear all the time people are like, well, I've got my one YouTube show and I put everything I have in it and it's not really growing. And it's like, of course it's not growing, because we live in an incredibly noisy economy and it takes a long time to build one of these shows.
Yeah.
So get yourself a gig where you're in the freelance world so you can take on clients and actually help them grow their stories, and use that as a way to build the thing that you're passionate about.
I love that. Okay, so just to be clear and do a recap for our creators out there is you have skill sets. You have skill sets. You have built YouTube channels, thumbnails, and all the things on the back end, and podcasts, podcasters, editing, setting up for podcast guests and setting up on the back end and the hosting and the branding and the launching, all those skill sets. What I'm hearing, Pete, is you take all those skill sets and you turn that into profit to go ahead and reinvest into your dream, into the things that light you up. And that's how you ultimately, little by little, start building your own empire. I love that.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a
simple,
not so secret.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's so many creators, including myself. We put a lot of work into it, and I know a lot of creators that are watching, listening. They have day jobs, and they're trying to find the capacity, and they're just trying to put that energy into their passion projects, but don't quite know. And it's a long game, so it's just they get burned out, and they're like, how can I do this creator thing and make it into a full-time, gig?
I recognize that I come at this from a place of great privilege, that I was at an organization and had a job at a place in the hierarchy where I could just decide I'm going to do a podcast in my job and make that a part of my job. I recognize total privilege. I also think if there's a way you can do that in your job, do it.
Yes. And
make yourself, it's amazing. You can make yourself indispensable by just doing it.
There's a phrase, and I was like, oh man, this is really good. I'm like, the creators are the new entrepreneurs, but the creators are now going to be so much more important moving forward because of the fact that, a lot of corporations, and we're seeing, B2B companies and SaaS companies and just major corporations now saying, oh, we want to do what the creators are doing because you guys are doing so much cooler things like podcasts and YouTube channels and are building empires, and we want those skill sets. So I always keep in mind and remind myself and encourage creators that are coming up that, we have skill sets that are priceless, that people are now paying big bucks for, including podcasting, where, right, Pete, you've seen it evolve. So let's talk about the evolution of podcasts. I'm curious to know, you OG, RSS feed, podcasting has evolved. Now it's gotten into video podcasting. I was at a podcast movement conference recently.
Sure.
And it's a $1 billion industry, as we know, in the advertising industry. There's so much money being poured into podcasting. I want to know your thoughts, really. I'm really curious to know where you see how podcasting has evolved, and where do you see it going?
Well, I'll just shout out my bias. I'm an audio lover, right? There is nothing like the space between headphone and ear, right? I just love that space of intimacy with listeners, and deep down, I think they like it too. When they can really sit down and focus on a great conversation. So that's what I love to create. And I've been dragged, my partner, True Story, has been dragging me sort of kicking and screaming into this video space of putting our live streams on video and investing more in video. That's my bias. I recognize this is where a lot of the attention is because it's so easy to sell ads on video, right? It's fine. That's where the money is. So you do what you got to do. But is podcasting going anywhere? No. I mean, we have a lot of headroom in the addressable audience. There are still a lot of people who have never tried a podcast. And that spells opportunity, right, for growth. We still have, in spite of the big players, Spotify, Apple, Google, trying to create islands of isolated podcasters like Spotify podcasters and Apple podcasters and trying to drag you away from the open ecosystem. They just can't do it, right? open podcasting is still flourishing. And I think that's the thing that allows podcasting to maintain its legs, because it can't be canceled. It's not a program that can just be ended. There will always be plain text RSS feeds that someone can handwrite if all else fails. There will always be a way to get these things out. And I feel sort of principledly confident about that. Because one, I just believe in our industry, and I love the people who are doing this thing. And there are so many people who are so just vastly more successful in building magnificently giant audiences than I am. They also feel that way, right? About the value of the relationships that we have. But the other thing that I think makes podcasting so special is that we often overestimate the size of the audience that it takes to make an impact on an individual podcaster's life. We think we're shooting for 10,000 downloads a listen, 20,000, 50,000, 150,000. We think we need to get up into those kinds of digits. But you start to see an impact on your life and change the way you live as a podcaster at 100 downloads, at 500 downloads. When you get those reviews that come in and say, I like your voice, I like listening to you, I like being a part of this community, I'd like to learn more. You get it when you open your first Discord server and you say, hey, come in. Those who enjoy my podcast, come on in. Be a part of this with me. That's when it starts to change your life. It doesn't take that much for those people to start to say, hey, I'll join your Patreon. I'll throw you $5 a month. I would love to be a part of this. And then you're making contribution and real money for doing this thing that you ostensibly are proud to do.
And, a good example, Pete, is the podcast, your podcast, the ADHD podcast, where, you guys are focusing on community, and you share some of the services that you provide for the listeners. And, you guys also have a Patreon, I believe, and obviously the book, which is also another addition to something you can promote on the show. And I love hearing that in the podcast, because you're providing great value and some great interviews, but also it also shows just so many opportunities that podcasters can get creative with, and providing products and providing services, and community, which has been something that's been kind of a big theme, especially in the creator world, is the importance of community. And I love the fact that we're investing in people through these creator islands that we're building.
Right.
I think you guys are doing a fantastic job with that. So,
well, I appreciate it. I mean, our real attention, and I think this is an area where creators sometimes, forget to focus, is you focus so much on the marketing side, on the promotion of a show, that you forget to focus on what the show really is. And that's a thing that we've really tried to do, to say, look, we want to create the best conversations that we can with high caliber, people in the ADHD industry, treatment industry, coaching industry, whatever. And we want to make that for the people who are most important to us. And those are the members that show up for the live stream. And so we tailor our product for, special member-only segments of every show in the beginning and at the end. So when people, they get their own personal podcast feed, they get all these kinds of perks in the podcast. And the result of that has been people find us because they hit the community and are told, did you know these guys have a podcast too? And it's great. And you should join the Patreon to get the really special parts. And so, I think I'm very passionate about it. I love what we do.
Yeah. And obviously you're invested in the podcasting space with the network, which you guys can find at truestory.fm of all the podcasts. Now, are you producing all those shows, or what's the relationship with the podcasters there?
It's a bit of a mix. So the True Story Entertainment shows, we produce some of them. We do a whole movie side of the house. We do interviews with industry folks. We do review shows, critique shows. We've got a number of small groups of podcasters who have come to us to join the community, and we support them on the technical back end and the production end, but we don't do any of the, talent stuff or research or anything like that. They do all that work. And then we have all of our client shows. So, all of the shows that we actually produce, some of them we host and produce, but all of those shows are also on there. So you'll see, it's not like you go to a podcast network and see, this is a network that specializes in technology podcasts. Right. No. Ours seems schizophrenic by comparison, but I'm a big fan of range of topics. Like, I like the idea of being able to hit people wherever they are. Yeah. And so not just for nerds, let's say that, even though I'm a nerd.
No, you guys are doing a fantastic job. And again, it's very colorful. I love the website. I was listening to some of the shows, and yeah, you're doing some great work there, Pete.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Guys, be sure to check it out. I have 2 more questions before we land the plane.
Let's do it.
The book, Unapologetically ADHD, highly encourage everybody to pick this book up, especially if you just listen to the podcast. I know it's amazing because everything that you and your co-host talk about, and it's Nikki, right, Pete? I just want to make sure.
Nikki
make sure. Right. Amazing job. Shout out to Nikki. If there's one, for our creators that are listening, if there's one key message, you hope to leave creators with regarding owning their ADHD, and channeling their creator journey from the book, what key message would that be?
Rewire the way you look at failure, because a creator with ADHD is like anyone with ADHD, and they live in a space of constant low-grade self-loathing, that they've let someone down, that they've not delivered fast enough, that they're going to let someone down, that they have really struggled with, whether it's picking up your kids from school on time to leaving your keys in the refrigerator, right? There's always something that you can look at about yourself with ADHD and feel like a failure. And I just want to say, you're not a failure. That's just you, and you're great. And failure is just another signpost on the road of wonder, right? It's just a data point. And it allows you to see something in a new way. And maybe it's that you always need to keep your keys in the refrigerator and you'll never lose them again. But it's not a sign that you are broken. It's just a data point. And that can mean that can be applied when you're looking at your daily workflow for creation. It can be applied when you're interviewing somebody that you're nervous to talk to and you fumble your words. It can apply to your editing choices where you forget to edit out a sneeze and a show goes live. Whatever the case is, it's just a data point and another opportunity to learn.
Okay. So normally I ask every guest, and I feel like you dropped a big one there on us. Normally I asked if there's one creator factor that every creator should learn and master. What would that be?
I think you got it.
That was it.
I think that's it, man.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think that's been the hardest thing for me to learn in my entire career, my entire life, is to figure out that just because we use the word failure does not mean that I am a failure. It just means that I have to learn something, that I have a skill yet to master. And sometimes it's an ADHD brain-related process issue. Sometimes it's a skills-based thing. Whatever it is, it's just something that means tomorrow I'm going to have to learn something new. And that's not bad.
TakingControlADHD.com, and of course pick up the book Unapologetically ADHD. You can find at Barnes & Noble, and you can also order on Amazon, and it's all linked up on the website. And of course TrueStory.fm if you want to check out all the amazing podcasts that Pete and his team have produced over there. Pete, my man, it's been such a pleasure just chatting with you, and I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for saying yes to this indie podcaster that just DM'd you out of nowhere and agreeing to be on the podcast and listening to the show, and just for all the work that you do. Your podcast came at a point in my life where I was at a crossroads, where I felt like a failure and didn't quite know what this brain was doing with life and career choices, and why I was dropping the ball on certain things that, were important, and just not figuring out where am I prioritizing my life, and things were just falling apart. And, your podcast was instrumental in giving me the tools and the resources and just the content that I needed to hear at that time to get me through some rough spots. I'm not sure if I shared this with you when I direct message you, but I wanted to keep it here for the podcast, that it truly made a powerful impact. And this is a testament that the work that you're doing, that you and Nikki are doing, is helping others and truly, truly making a positive impact and influence for people with ADHD. So I want to personally thank you for all the work that you and Nikki are doing, and just grateful for this friendship, and excited to continue staying in touch with you, brother. So thank you so much.
Much love, Ozeal. Absolutely. This has been fantastic, and thank you.